Psalm 107. I'm going to read a few verses from this psalm, and then I guess tonight not so much give you an exegesis, but give you an exhortation to encourage you and maybe stir you up a little bit. When people read the Psalms, they often think that the Psalms are primarily devotional. And certainly the Psalms are devotional, and they have been used by God's people throughout the years to comfort, to relate to our given situation. There's favorite Psalms that people have, but there are places in the Psalms that are more than just devotional. Some of those places, the Psalms are prophetic. They were speaking of things that had not yet happened, many of which have now happened. But sometimes the Psalm, it goes further than it appears in its initial reading. Sometimes it's devotional in application, but it's also prophetic. So I want to read to you from Psalm 107. I want to talk to you tonight about the work of God, serving God, walking with God. I'm going to tell you some stories tonight. I think it'll be relaxed. You can just sit and listen tonight. I'll tell you about some things that have happened. When I share those stories with you, I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to use the names of the people involved. And I'm going to use their real names. And I'm going to do that because I want you to know that what I'm telling you tonight is true. And so I will give the names of the people and the places so you can know and authenticate that what I'm telling you is true. So let's start by reading Psalm 107 from verse number 23 and talking about the work of God. It says, "They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters, these see the works of the Lord, and his wonders in the deep. For he commandeth and raiseth the stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They mount up to the heaven, they go down again to the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. They reel to and fro, and stagger like a drunken man, and are at their wits' end. Then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distresses. He maketh the storm a calm, so that the waves thereof are still. Then are they glad because they be quiet, so he bringeth them unto their desired haven." This psalm is talking about the people who do the work of God. And it likens us to ships, or going to the sea in ships and going out to deep waters and doing the works of God. And as I reflect back now over some nearly 50 years of serving the Lord and salvation and walking with God, I now read this psalm and I think back that all the times that I have seen God work and the amazing things I've seen in different places around the world. And it is true. If you will go out into the deep waters, you will see things of God that everybody else will not necessarily see. So this is the thought tonight. Firstly, I want to say that a ship is to launch out into great waters. Nobody builds a ship to sit in a harbour. You could go down to Garden Island or somewhere else and you will see these warships and others sitting down there and anchored, and not much is happening. But no ship is made for that. Every ship that is made is designed to be able to go out, because the business of the ships is not in the harbor. The business of the ships is outside in the deep waters. And this is likening the ships to a believer. God did not shape you for you to live your life in the shallows. God did not shape you that you would do nothing more for God than what you could feel safe and secure in. You will not see everything that you could see in your life unless you go out to a deeper place and in the deep waters. I remember as a little boy, I was born in Brisbane and grew up in Brisbane. And as a tiny little boy, my mum and dad would take me down to Shorncliffe. And if you go to Shorncliffe now, you probably would say, people swim there. But that's where I would get taken to Shorncliffe. And, you know, I would play and I would go out in the water, but I would barely go out in water above my knee. You know, it was just fun. And you stayed in a place where you could see where mum and dad were. And you didn't want to go out any further than that. But as you grow up, as I grew up, mum and dad didn't allow me to keep going down to Shorncliffe. I remember the time they sent me with Grandma. And Grandma was my dad's mother. And my dad's mother, she had darker skin. And she had a body shape a bit like a pear. And she would wear these big black bathers. And Grandma would take me, she'd take my hand and she'd say, we're going to go out into the surf. And I'd say, but, you know, I'm scared of the surf. She said, no, you have to learn. And Grandma would take me by the hand and we would go out into the surf and I'd be holding tight to her hand and I'd want to stop, you know. And she said, no, we have to go out further. And as the waves would come in, you know, Grandma'd lift me up and I could feel I wasn't touching anything. And they were getting me used to that, you know, you're a Sehmish and this is what we do. We go out in the water and you've got to learn to go out into the deeper waters. And finally, I remember the time they put me in a boat and they pushed me out of the boat. And that was really deeper waters. And I had to make my way back in. But the idea was that you've got to learn that you can't live your life in the shallows. And what happens in the Christian life is that we want everything to be predictable, certain, safe, and we don't want to risk anything. And we don't want to launch out beyond what we can control. And we don't want to launch out beyond what we know will happen. And yet this psalm is saying to us that the business of the Lord is not found in the shallows. And it's a waste of life to never venture out. A ship is not made to stay in the harbor. In fact, the most dangerous time for a ship is two things: shallow waters and slow speed. Because in shallow waters, it's too easy to run aground and get stuck. And that's not a safe place for a ship. A ship is designed to be somewhere deeper. And slow speed means you have less control. And so coming into harbors and such, when a ship is at slow speed, it's a little more vulnerable. And you'll typically see a tug or something else there, and they're trying to make sure that nothing happens. It's dangerous. And I want to say, as believers, that living a life in the shallows is more dangerous than launching out for God. And if you really want to see what God can do, what a waste to get to heaven and sing songs about God who spoke the world into being. He didn't even shape it with his hands. He didn't need to. A God of all power and all ability. A God who can answer every prayer. And to know all these things, but never experience any of it in your life. And to stay in the shallows is to miss what God has for you. You should not be making your life decisions based on what is easy and safe. You should be making your life decisions based on what is the will of God for you at this time, and to be willing to launch out. Ships are not made to stay in shallow waters. You've got to go out. Now, folks, I found out when I got to Thailand, I was in deep waters again. And many times I felt overwhelmed. Many times I said, God, this is too deep for me. And I'm not sure that I can do this. I left a church in Brisbane that was well established and doing well. And I had reached, had gone up in the work, and we'd achieved some things, and it would have been easy to just stay. And there was no more battles to fight. And we'd won. We'd subdued the Philistines. And we were in a secure place. But God was not content to leave me there. And it can be a terrible waste of life to stay in the shallows and never get to experience what God has for you. You know, you are the one who doubts you the most. God believes in you much more than you believe in yourself. You are the one who tells yourself, I can't. You are the one who tells yourself, that's too big, too hard, too far for me. And yet God knows what you can really do. God, you see, you underestimate yourself so often. All of us are Gideon. And the angel of God stands there and says, behold, thou mighty man of valor. And Gideon says, where is he? You know, it couldn't be me, but it is you. It is you. Now, how do you say that? Because God was seeing something in Gideon that Gideon could not see in himself. God said, it's there. It's in you. You're made for this. You're birthed for this. You can do it. Someone said that the fastest runner in the world never took to the track. The person who could lift the most never picked up a weight. And it's so true that out there somewhere are people who could do it better than those who've done it, but they just never went to the track. They never did it. You're made to launch out for God. And you need to weigh that up, what kind of life do you want to have? Young people, what kind of life do you want to have? At one time I remember being in Thailand thinking, God, I'm too old for this. It's too hard, and I'm not sure I can do it. And just as I was meditating, I heard a song, and this was the words of the song. The song is called "This Ship Was Made to Sail," and the words of the song were, "Cut the ties that bind you to the dock of your defeat. There's no fear of troubled water when you're sailing the holy fleet. The anchor must be lifted as the waves begin to swell. All aboard, the master's calling. This ship was made to sail. So move on out of the harbor. This ship was made to sail. Bought by the blood of the captain, this vessel will prevail. Scriptures now have charted a course that cannot fail. So don't worry about the journey. This ship was made to sail. So move on out in the harbor. This ship was made to sail. Bought by the blood of the captain, this vessel will prevail." And you're made to launch out and go out further than most Christians ever go. I thank God that in many ways I just believed a lot of things that God said. And I just believed it was so. And I've been witness to amazing things that God has done. And you say, was there risk in that? There was. Number two is this. He makes the point that those who do his business in deep waters, look at verse 24, these see the works of the Lord. These, who? The people who went out on the great waters. That they get to see things that God does that other people don't get to see. You know what we do? We buy books to read about the miracles that happened in another man's life. We buy books to read about the faith that another man had. We rejoice in what God did with another, somehow thinking that is relegated to history and that doesn't happen anymore. And that's not true. God is still doing things in our day. God is still able to do the miraculous. God is still able to astound you with what he does. But you'll never see that if you stay in the shallows. You've got to go out. You've got to take a risk for God. I remember in 1983, I was about 21, and I was attending a church in Bald Hills in Queensland, and attending this little church, and the pastor who did not particularly like me, but I remember the pastor got up and making the announcements on a Sunday night service. The pastor said, and I'm going to use the lady's name, he said, folks, as a number of you know, we have been praying for Jeanette Lehman. And Jeanette now is very close to going. The disease has ravished her. And please pray for the family. And just remember her at this hour. And I heard that announcement on that Sunday night service. And as the service concluded, my friend, Graham Frith, his real name, came up to me. And he said to me, Wayne, did you hear the announcement about Jeanette Lehman? She was probably, I'm going to say, around about age 50. And I said, yes, I did. And he said, well, what did you think about that? And I said, well, I don't know what to think. I think it's terribly sad. He said, Wayne, would you be willing to come back to my house tonight after the service? And he said, would you be willing to pray with me through the whole night? And in the morning, we will go up to Jeanette Lehman and pray that God would restore her. And he said, he said, Wayne, do you believe that God could do that? And I said, well, I do believe that God could. And he said, all right. Graham turned to another one of our friends. His name was Bob Quinn. And Graham said to Bob, he said, Bob, do you believe that God could heal Jeanette Lehman? And Bob said, well, I just believe that God can do whatever he wants to do. And Graham said, no, you're not coming. And so it came down to Graham and I. We went back to his house. We probably got back there about 8:30 at night. And Graham and I prayed the whole night through. I was 21. Graham was a few years older. We would pray for 30, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, pause for 5, 10 minutes, pray again. We opened the Bible. We read from the book of James where God said, is any among you sick? Let him call the elders. And the prayer of faith shall restore the one that is sick. And we read that out as we prayed, and we called upon God. And we prayed through to midnight. And then we prayed from 1 to 2. And we prayed again through to 3 or 4. And I'm telling you that the two of us prayed the night through. Two young men who believed that God could do something. I wasn't the pastor. I wasn't on the church staff. I wasn't a ministry leader. I wasn't even particularly liked by the pastor. But I was just there. And we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed. And I guess around about 6 o'clock or thereabouts, I'm telling you, I was feeling nauseous and unwell from not sleeping. And if you've been awake all night, some of you know that feeling. And we got to, and I could see the light was starting to break through the curtains. And we had prayed all night. And Graham said to me, well, Wayne, it's time to go. And I said, okay. We got in Graham Frith's Datsun and drove to the other side of Brisbane, got to the hospital there at Green Slopes, parked the car, and it was probably 6:30, 6:45, something like that. And Graham and I made our way up to the ward where we had heard that she was. And we walked in. Nobody stopped us. We walked down, and we got to her room. She was in a private room. We went in the room, opened the door very early hours of the morning, and there she was laying in the bed looking every bit as sick as the pastor had said she was. In fact, she did not acknowledge us being there. And she was just laying there, and I wasn't even sure if she was still alive. And I looked, and Graham looked, And he got around on one side of the bed, and I got around on the other side of the bed. And Graham put his hand on one of her arms, and I put my hand on one of her arms. And we just prayed to God. And we said, God, we've prayed to you through the night. And you know that I believe what you said in the Bible. And you know that I don't doubt what you can do. And I pray, Lord, would you have mercy now and raise this lady up and make her well again. And I prayed and I asked in Jesus' name, and Graham prayed. And as I opened my eyes from praying, we looked at Jeanette Lehman, and honestly, there didn't look to be a single change. She just was laying there. And I got to tell you, I looked at her, and I looked at Graham, and Graham looked at me, and we stood there for a minute, and Graham said, I think it's time to go, Wayne. And I said, okay. And Graham and I got and we walked out the doors. There was no conversation. We were feeling weary, tired, and many things were going through our mind. We got down to the car, and Graham drove me back to my house, stopped out the front, and said, see you. I said, see you. I went up into my house, and I was exhausted. I went and I fell asleep. Probably maybe an hour and a half or maybe two after, the phone rang. This was the days when we didn't have mobile phones. There was a phone on the wall. And the phone rang, and I remember waking up and walking out, and I picked up the phone, said, hello, and it was the pastor. And he said, Wayne? I said, oh, yes, Pastor. He said, did you and Graham go up to the hospital this morning? And I said, yes, Pastor. I said, where are you, Pastor? He said, I'm at the hospital now. And I said, oh, I thought she died. I said, is everything all right? He said, what did you do when you came up here? I said, we prayed. I said, what, Pastor, what's happening? Is she okay? He said, she's beside the bed riding an exercise bike. I said, she's riding an exercise bike? He said, yes. All the nurses are standing around. Everybody's looking at her. I said, oh, thank you, Pastor. The next Sunday, Jeanette Lehman was in the church. She was in the service, and Jeanette asked the pastor if she could stand up and testify. And Jeanette got up and stood up in the church, and she said, she began to cry. She said, these boys, and she pointed. She said, they came, and she said, they prayed for me. And she said, I felt my strength came back, and she gave a testimony how that God had restored her. And Jeanette Lehman was in church for a long, long time after. And I want you to say, you know, we don't see these things because we're afraid of the risk. You say, well, what would have happened if you went up there and prayed for her and you didn't see anything? Well, you know, if you think that way, you'll never do anything. If you always think that, you'll never do anything. And that woman bore testimony of what God did. Now, I'm not Betty Hinn, and I'm not any of that, and I don't believe that. But I do believe that God can still heal people. I believe the power of God. I believe in the presence of God. I believe He's here tonight. I believe He's trying to touch some of you. And I saw God do it. I saw Him do it. And I've seen Him do it several times since. I was pastoring in Good Shepherd Baptist Church, many of you know, in Brisbane. And we had a man in the church, and I'll use his name. Some of you know him. And his name was David Holowati. And Dave did not have a girlfriend when other people did. You know, and sometimes David asked for prayer, you know, pray that I get a wife. And people had, you know, everyone knew it'd take a special girl for Dave. You know what I'm saying? And people had, and they'd pray, and we wondered who it would ever be. And one day he met her, and she's a lovely lady, she's a beautiful lady, she still is. And Dave met Glenda, and Glenda fell for Dave, and we don't know why, but she did. And Dave fell for Glenda, and it just seemed like God brought those two together. And they married in the church, and you know, I didn't think a great deal about it. We had a lot happening in the church, but I did notice something. I noticed we had a lot of people in the church having babies or announcing that they were with child, and I would see that a woman would bring her new baby to the church, and I'd see all the ladies, you know, all hovering around the new baby. But often Glenda would just be standing back a little bit. And I didn't know what it was, but I would look. And I guess I just saw a look on her face. And it was just a sad look. And I noticed it a few times. And I don't know how long it was, a year or two, I'm not sure. But finally, one day I said to Dave, I said, mate, how are you and Glenda? And he said, well, you know, well, to be honest, not great. I said, well, mate, what's happening? And he said, and I think he'd be okay with me sharing this. I've shared it in other places. I've shared it. People at Good Shepherd know what I'm telling you is true. And he said, well, Pastor, he said, you see, me and Glendy, we're not able to have a child. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, we went to the doctor. I said, which doctor? And I said, and then what did you do? He said, well, then we went and saw a specialist. And I said, and what did he say? And he said, no, it's not possible for you to be able to have a child. And he told why. And I said, well, what's this program, that's IVF thing I've been hearing about? He said, no, we looked into that, and we don't qualify for that. He said, it's impossible. And I said, mate, why didn't you come and ask me to pray? And he just looked at me. And I said, here's what I want you to do, Dave. I said, I want you to go home and talk to Glenda. And I want you to meet me in my office on Monday night. Only you two. And there'll be no meeting. You just come. And I'm going to pray for you to have a child. 7 o'clock Monday. Before you come, mate, I want you and Glenda to get alone with God. And if there's any sin or anything God brings to you, I want you to get that right. Before you get to me, deal with that. And so we had a few days till that Monday, and I went to Suzanne, and I said, Suzanne, I said, I need you to go out and buy me a baby gift. And she said, oh, who is it for? And I said, I'm not telling you. And she said, well, at least tell me, is it a boy or a girl? And I said, I don't know. I said, buy something that'll work for either. And so she didn't understand it, but Suzanne went out. She bought the baby gift. She brought it back. I said, honey, wrap it in nice baby paper and put a ribbon on it, and I have to give it to some people. She gave it to me. 7 o'clock, a Monday night came round. I went to my office. Dave and Glenda came in quietly, timidly. I said, let's pray. I took out a little olive oil I had just sitting on my shelf, and David and Glenda knelt down, and I knelt down beside them. I turned in my Bible to James chapter 5, and I read aloud to God things that he'd already said. And I didn't read it thinking that God had forgotten it, but I just wanted to remind him of what he'd said. And I read it out, and I said, now, Lord, I didn't say this. And Lord, if I'd said, I couldn't say it. And I didn't put it in a book, and Lord, you did. You said that. And Lord, you know that I believe what you say. And you know I believe this. And I prayed a prayer like that, and Dave and Glenda had their head bowed. I took a little bit of oil, and I put it on Glenda's forehead and prayed that God would give him a baby. In Jesus' name, amen. We got up off the floor. And as we were done, they began to make their way. I said, one moment. I said, before you go, I have something for you. And they turned and looked at me, and I took the baby gift. And I turned over my hand, I said, this is for your child. And I'll never forget the look. They looked at the gift, and I said, take it. They reached out, they took it. I said, you come and let me know when you're with child. And I remember they walked out into the night. I don't know how long after it was. I don't know if it was 5 weeks. I don't know if it was 6 weeks. It was a number of weeks after. I remember Dave pulling up outside my house and coming up to the door and knocking. And I'm something like, Pastor, you won't believe it. You won't believe it. I said, I think I will. Tell me. And he said, we just found out Glenda's with child. And God blessed them with a little boy that they called Samuel. And they've had several children since. And I'm just telling you, if you never go out into deep waters, you won't see these things. You say, but what if it hadn't happened? You made a fool of yourself. You see, you think that way, you'll never see anything. Because you're more worried about you than you are about what you believe in God for. And I could tell you about John and Crystal Winkler, about their baby. And I could tell you about others. And I'm just saying to you that if you want to see the amazing things that God can do, you don't get to see that by trying to stay in the shallows and live a life without risk. You only get to see God in great ways when you launch out by faith. Do you know that God will never fail His word? Do you know there's never been anyone in history who could say to God, you said something and it didn't happen or it wasn't true? Do you understand that God backs His word with His name and His power and His might? Do you believe that it is true that everything is possible with God? And I've seen God work miracles of many kinds across many places. I've been in meetings and seen extraordinary things happen. But I'm saying you'll never get to see that if you just try to stay safe in the shallows. Sometime you have to launch out for God. Sometime you have to go further than your own confidence. Sometime you have to go out on a limb and just trust God and believe God. And many, many times I've seen His wonders. I've seen His wonders in saving people. I've seen amazing things. I've seen lives changed. I've seen Mary Magdalene delivered of 7 demons. I've seen the transformation. I've seen extraordinary things. I've seen things I can't explain. And I've seen God do it again and again and again. And it's not me, it's Him. But I want you to know tonight He's able. And He hasn't gone to sleep and He's not dead. He's just looking for somebody to believe what He said. And somebody who just dares to trust Him. And we've shaped a culture of Christianity where we just want to stay in the shallows where it's safe. And I feel sorry for you who want to live that way. I feel sorry that you can see much more than you're seeing. We're limited. Our vision is small. Our faith is so often little. And we have to ask God to enlarge that. Again and again, I've seen extraordinary things. I've seen it in Thailand. I get many calls in Thailand for things. I've seen it in Papua New Guinea. I've seen God do extraordinary things. Things that scared me, but I saw God do it. And I'm just saying that these, the Bible says, who will go to the deep and do His work, these see His works. Now, when you launch out for God, the Bible tells us what can happen. And in verse number 26 to 27, there's an honest account of what happens when you launch out for God. It says that they mount up to the heaven. The jubilation of seeing wonderful things. they go down again to the depths. About every man of God you ever knew had some time in the depths. About every man of God you ever knew spent some time in the cave. And that's part of it. You know, there are no supermen in the faith. There are just men who believe God. But they're still men. And God said this is part of it. And God is being honest with you. If you'll go out, you know, you see on the sea, there's the going up and the going down, and the going up. And that often happens. Wind and waves and storms. It talks about in verse 25. It's not an easy ride. It said in verse, they mount up, they go down. Verse 26 talks of soul melting trouble because you're doing his work in the deep. My son Justin was a lieutenant in the Navy for a while, Navy officer. And Justin would tell me, he'd say, Dad, I see amazing things that I couldn't believe when I'm out on the ship. You see, normal ships or merchant ships follow certain particular bearings when they go on their journey. A bit like an unmarked highway across the sea. And they go the shortest way, and they go a particular way, and a bit like planes in the air. And that's how most ships do their business. You see them and you don't know that, but they're all following pretty much a particular bearing to where they're going. But if you're a military ship, you don't want to do that because you don't want to tell everybody else that you're right there on that highway. So they will go off in altogether different places that other ships don't get to go. And my son has told me about things he's seen out there. And I say, tell me about that. And I'm saying wonders in the deep. And that's what God is saying. When you go out for him, you'll see amazing things. No man will surrender his life and trust God and launch out to have God fail him. Nobody's going to do that. God is with you. And Suzanne and I went to Thailand. We had one church supporting us. One church. And you can't live off one church's support on a foreign field. And we just went. We just believed God. And if you said to me, well, what's the plan? Really, I didn't know what the plan was. I wasn't sure what to do. You see, you talk to someone 15 years later and you say, well, you know, look at the blessing. Yeah, but I want to tell you, brother, we didn't always have this. There were days that we went up and we went down. There was soul-melting trouble. There were days we despaired. But I can tell you tonight, God never failed. He never failed. I can tell you we never went without. I can tell you he watched over us. Despite the planning and conspiracies of some, God preserved us. And he was with us. And he'll never fail you when you trust him, when you launch out. And sometimes you look at it, and depending when you look, in verse number 27, it doesn't always look good. And that's why you need to be patient sometimes with missionaries and others who've launched out for God. It says in verse 27, they reel to and fro. They stagger like a drunken man. They're at their wits' end. Have you ever seen a drunk man walk? It's not a pretty sight. He's a little bit here, so he's going to go, and he recovers again, and it doesn't look pretty. And depending when you look, it can look like that. There's been times over 15 years of serving God in Thailand that if you just looked at the right time, you say, what's going on with Brother Sehmish? What's happening with Brother Sehmish? And there are times it feels like I'm at my wit's end. But you know what it said? It said that they, in verse 27, they are at, listen, their wit's end. They're not at God's end. That's just your end. That's just you've come to your limit. But you haven't come to God's limit. And that's when remarkable grace kicks in, when you get to the end of yourself. And that's when you start to see things that you could never do, when you get to that place. You get to your end, but that's not God's end. And sometimes you've just got to be patient. You look at something and think, I don't know what's happening here, but just give it time. And God is working. But you'll never see any of that. I could tell you about salvations that even other Thais can't believe happen. I remember seeing things and just families and whole villages being perplexed. How could this be? How could this happen? I've been over there where doctors have just been speechless at somebody's progression and change, and just astounded that how could this be? Doctors who are finding themselves saying, no more medicine, you don't need it, and just being shocked. And I'm telling you that there's a living God who is all powerful, and he can do, and he wants to do, and there is no limit with God. The limit is our unbelief. The limit is the smallness of the Christianity we've shaped for ourselves. And it's a sad day that you would live a whole life and not see the things that God would have you to see. And then I want to conclude tonight by just pointing out something here. It said in verse number 28, after their troubles, soul-melting troubles, staggering at their wits' end. Verse number 28 said, then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distresses. Oh my, how often I've seen it. God help me, I'm at an end. And he'll deliver. And he'll get me through. And I've seen it again and again and again. I've cried out to God. I said, I can't go anymore. I'm at my end. I can't take another step. I can't bear it. And God will come. And there'll be a marvelous deliverance and an extra measure of grace given. And I've seen it over and over again. And it's faith strengthening. It says in verse 29, look in your Bible, he maketh the storm a calm. And I'm sure that ought to be the prayer of some tonight who are in a storm. Lord, please say, peace, be still. Please command the wind and the storm to cease. And the same Jesus who did it before can do it for you. And he maketh the storm a calm, and the waves thereof are still. And they are glad and quiet. He bringeth them to their desired heaven. You know, when you go out in the deep for God, there's testing times. Let me tell you something about the Bible you may not have noticed before. Nobody in the Bible ever drowned in the deep serving God. Paul was in the deep. There were people shipwrecked, floating out there. But there were people in storms. There were people who thought they were going to drown. But nobody who had the Lord ever drowned in the sea. Never. You're not going to drown out there. It's not going to bring you down. You'll feel like it, but that never happens to the Lord's people. It never happened. Some in the Bible floated by hanging on a piece of wood. Paul was out there for days and nights, but nobody ever drowned. Nobody ever did. On every occasion, God got them to their desired haven. And you never have to fear that. You say, it's going to take me under. It'll never take you under in the Lord. It'll never take you under. It can't. It's not permitted. God is with you. You're not going to drown. You'll get through. You're going to make it. And you can believe God. Some went way down, but they came up again. Jonah went down, but he came up again. Some had shipwrecks, but they made it. Some had to float in on broken pieces, but they made it. And as long as you're out there for God, he'll always be with you. And I want to just challenge you tonight to pray prayers of faith. And if God is speaking to you about believing him and going a little bit further, be willing to do that. Trust God. The greatest way you praise him and the greatest testimony you give of him is when you trust him. Because that's when you put it on the line and you say, I trust you, I believe you, I believe you. And you'll see amazing things.